After 9 years of marriage, my husband called his affair true love. He said she was pure and didn't care about money. I didn't argue. I called my assistant and said, freeze his accounts, terminate the funding, and change every lock he still thinks he owns. That morning began like any other except for the silence that felt heavier than air. I stood before the mirror, adjusting the collar of my charcoal blazer. Realizing I had been staring at myself for too long, it was our 9th anniversary. Though the date felt more like a statistic than a celebration, Chicago's skyline glowed faintly behind the glass. A city too awake to care who was breaking quietly inside it. I chose a simple black dress instead of the one I used to wear when we still celebrated things. The kind that said confidence, not nostalgia. I wrapped a small model of a steel framework in tissue paper and slipped it into my bag. It was a gift that carried memory, the first project Derek and I had built together. The thing that started us back then. We lived on takeout and late-night sketches, promising each other that one day we would design a life, not just buildings. I had believed it the way some people believe in gravity. By noon, I left the office earlier than usual. The air outside was sharp, the kind that cuts through perfume and memory alike. Traffic blurred around me as I rehearsed what I would say. Something light, something kind, the sort of tone you use when you still believe in repair. The studio sat on the corner of Michigan Avenue, a glass box glowing with fluorescent ambition. I could see the silhouettes moving inside. Derek's familiar tilt of the head, his hand slicing the air as he spoke about structure. Always structure. I smiled briefly, thinking maybe he remembered too when I stepped inside the building. His voice carried down the corridor. Steady and confident. The same one that once talked me through fear and fatigue. I wasn't supposed to hear what came next. She's everything Julia isn't, he said. Low but clear, soft, creative, not consumed by deadlines. I stopped walking. The echo folded around me. Deliberate of her final. Someone laughed softly. A woman's voice I didn't recognize, he added. She reminds me what freedom feels like. I didn't drop the gift. I didn't run. I just stood there holding the symbol of our beginning, realizing it had quietly become an artifact of our end. There's a sound the heart makes when comprehension arrives before emotion. It isn't loud. It's the stillness between two breaths. The small click when something inside locks shut. I turned away from the doorway, walked back toward the elevator and pressed the button without looking down. The mirrored doors closed on my reflection. Calm and composed. The kind of calm that comes after surrender. Some endings don't scream. They whisper just loud enough to break you. The next morning, I went to work as if nothing had shifted. Though everything inside me had, Chicago looked the same. Steel glass motion, but it no longer mirrored the order I had built my life on. My meetings blurred. Words passed through me. And yet beneath the noise, one thought stayed constant. He had chosen someone who could exist without the weight of responsibility. Someone who didn't make him feel small beside her own competence. That afternoon, as I reviewed expense reports, the numbers began to tell a story I had refused to read. Years of habit trained me to fix problems before they grew teeth. Derek had once said, "You make chaos look organized." I had taken it as love. Looking back, it was instruction. He didn't want a partner. He wanted infrastructure, a system that absorbed pressure, processed failure, and stayed invisible when it worked. I remembered when he struggled through graduate school, and I paid for his tuition renewal with my bonus check, assuring him that partnership meant shared burden. I remembered signing for the loan on his first studio, saying, "We're in this together." I had believed it. He had simply agreed. As I opened my banking app, the pattern was too familiar to ignore. Small withdrawals timed around the same dates Lena's tuition was due, restaurant charges labeled as client meetings, and rental payments to an ERFs near campus. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was financing his betrayal with joint accounts I managed. I stared at the screen, at the precision of each transaction, and thought about how every deception has a structure, beams of omission, walls of charm, the facade of need. I had built this structure with my own hands, steady and proud, never realizing it was a house designed to collapse on me. When Derek first met Lena, I had even congratulated him. She was a graduate intern from the university's urban design program. Earnest and eager. I remember her first week. How she came to my office to thank me for the company's internship fund. "You're the kind of leader I want to become." She said. I had smiled, thinking her sincerity was proof that mentorship still mattered. I didn't know I was funding my replacement. Driving home that evening, I caught my reflection in the rear-view mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My face looked composed, but underneath there was a new equation forming a recalculation of worth, investment, and loss. I realized betrayal doesn't start with lies. It starts when one person stops being seen as human and becomes a function. I had been a function too long. The provider, the solver, the woman who made problems disappear before anyone else noticed. Derek once joked, "You're the reason I can dream big." I finally understood what he meant. My labor had been the scaffolding for his illusions. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the folder labeled Home Accounts. It wasn't grief that steadied my hand. It was clarity. I printed statements, highlighted connections, traced every dollar to its destination. The lines converged into truth. Elegant, merciless, absolute. He hadn't betrayed love. He had embezzled it. I closed the folder, leaned back in the chair, and whispered to no one. He called me rigid while signing every check I wrote. The words landed without anger, only recognition. Some people build futures, others borrow them until the lender finally wakes up. That was the moment I did. By the time I reached the studio again, the city had already slipped into its evening rhythm. Windows burned with yellow light, streets hummed with exhaustion, and my pulse matched every traffic signal that turned red. I parked across the street, watching the movement inside through the wide glass wall. Derek stood near the drafting table, his sleeves rolled up, his voice warm and confident as he leaned over a set of plans. Lena sat beside him, nodding, her pencil tracing air. Her smile practiced. The intimacy between them was the kind that didn't need touch to declare itself. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The hum of conversation fell away as if someone had cut a wire. Derek looked up. Startled, the color draining from his face. I didn't give him time to compose it back on. "Keep going," I said evenly. "I'd like to hear how inspiration turned into intimacy." Lena's hand froze over her sketch pad. Derek stammered, "Ulia, this isn't what it looks like." I smiled faintly. "Then tell me what it is." "I've spent 9 years funding clarity." And turn of it, he moved toward me, voice trembling between anger and fear. "You shouldn't be here." I stepped closer, setting my bag on the table beside his blueprints. "And yet this place exists because I was." He blinked. "Thrown off balance? What do you mean?" I ran my finger over the studio logo printed on the draft. The one my company had quietly financed. The deposit for this lease, the materials, the permits, the grants. Those weren't architectural miracles. Derek, they were transactions. You called me rigid while signing every check I wrote. Yes. Lena rose from her chair, whispering, "We didn't mean to hurt you." I turned to her. Not unkindly, but without softness. "You didn't. You just miscalculated my silence." Her eyes filled with guilt. She didn't yet understand. Derek's voice sharpened. "You control everything. You leave no air for love." I looked at him. "Steady. Structure isn't control. It's what kept you from collapsing." The words landed like a closing door. He tried to recover, to shape the scene into sympathy. "You don't know what it's like to live under constant judgment." I tilted my head. "I know what it's like to live under constant expense." His jaw tightened. "You make it sound like money is the only thing that matters." I met his eyes. "No, Derek. Integrity was supposed to matter, too. But apparently that wasn't part of your design." The silence that followed stretched until it became its own architecture. "Rigid, symmetrical, unbreakable," Lena whispered. "We just connect differently. You've outgrown each other." I laughed once quietly. "He hasn't outgrown me. He's been living off me." Derek slammed his hand on the table. "Enough." I didn't flinch. "Tomorrow," I said, "the studio's funding will be terminated. My firm's name will be removed from every contract. I built this. I'll dismantle it." He froze, a disbelief widening into panic. "You can't just erase me." I picked up one of his pencils and snapped it clean in half. "Watch me." He reached out, desperate. Voice cracking between apology and plea. "Julia, wait. We can talk." I stepped back, sliding my bag over my shoulder. We already did. You just preferred your version of the conversation. Lena murmured something about love being complicated. Her tone almost childlike. I looked at her one last time. Love isn't complicated. Deception is. As I walked toward the door, Derek called after me. What are you going to do? I didn't turn around. What I do best. I'll solve the problem outside. The air hit cold against my skin. The kind that wakes you more than it hurts. The glass behind me reflected their silhouettes. Him standing still. Her sitting down, and for a moment, it looked like a frame from a life I had already outgrown. The city moved on. Traffic resumed and I joined it. Some structures collapsed quietly. Others, you bring down yourself. That night, the apartment buzzer rang just as I was setting down my glass of water. I knew who it was before I answered. Barbara's voice came through the speaker. Clipped and self-assured. Julia, open the door. We need to talk. I pressed the button without a word. Moments later, she walked in with Melissa trailing behind. Both carrying the authority of people who had mistaken dependency for belonging. Barbara took the couch as if it were still her son's home. A wife shouldn't shame her husband in front of his students. She set her tone, the same one she used at church luncheons when she needed to sound moral. I stayed standing. A mother shouldn't raise a man who confuses dependence with love. Barbara's mouth tightened. Melissa crossed her arms and sighed dramatically. You've gone too far. Derek's devastated. You should have talked privately, not humiliated him in his own studio. I looked at her. The way one looks at a spreadsheet that doesn't balance. Privately? I repeated. Like the way you all discussed his affair privately without me. Barbara frowned. Dismissive. Don't twist things. Men make mistakes. A smart woman knows how to handle that quietly. The sentence was rehearsed. A generational script polished smooth by repetition. I moved closer, stopping in front of her. Quietly is how exploitation survives. You've been living on my paychecks for 5 years and still think silence is virtue. Melissa rolled her eyes. We just need a few months until things calm down. You can't freeze everything. I smiled without warmth. You've been calming down since Derek's first promotion. Somehow nothing ever settled. Only your bills did. Barbara leaned forward, voice trembling with self-righteousness. Money isn't everything. Julia, I nodded slowly. Funny? It's the only thing you remember to ask me for. I'm Za. She gasped as if insulted. Though the truth had barely touched her. Our family has values, she said. Loyalty, forgiveness, affection. I tilted my head. Values are easy to praise when someone else pays the rent. Melissa muttered something about me being cold. How I never understood what it meant to nurture a family. You mean enabling? I corrected. There's a difference. Barbara straightened her purse strap and looked at me the way people look at a misbehaving child. You think you're above us because you have money? I shook my head. No, I think I've finally realized who's been standing on me to reach higher ground. Ah. The air shifted then heavy with offense. Barbara tried to soften her tone. A last attempt at control. You'll regret cutting us off. Family is all you'll have when the world turns on you. I turned toward the window, watching the city lights blink like indifferent witnesses. If family means debt disguised as love, then I'll manage without it. I picked up my phone, dialed Tara, and said quietly, freeze every shared account effective immediately. Barbara's voice rose. You can't do this. Derek needs access to pay for things. I looked back at her. He'll have to learn the cost of independence. Melissa stood abruptly. You're destroying this family. I met her star. No, I'm ending a transaction. Barbara grabbed her coat. Anger covering what pride could not. You'll regret this arrogance. I walked them to the door and opened it. Arrogance is thinking the person who carried you will keep doing it forever. She hesitated, then stepped out, her perfume lingering like an old lie. When the door shut, the apartment was silent again. I didn't feel relief or triumph. Only the faint click of something locking into place. Entitlement had finally met its invoice. The next morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise. The city was still half asleep. But the sound of delivery trucks echoed like a countdown. I turned on my computer, opened the spreadsheet that had quietly carried our entire marriage and began to close the world Derek had mistaken for his own. Every number on the screen was a thread. And I pulled them one by one. When people talk about revenge, they imagine rage. Mine was administrative. By 8. I had met with the finance department. My tone was measured. Every instruction framed as a procedural update. I asked them to revoke Derek's secondary access to all corporate accounts. Suspend payments to the architecture studio and flag every transaction tied to his grant project. Effective immediately, I said. Tara looked uncertain. Should we notify him first? I signed the final authorization and replied, no, silence will deliver the message. She hesitated again. This might burn bridges. I looked up from the paper. Bridges built on deceit deserve fire. From there, I called Human Resources to terminate his consulting contract with the company. The department head asked if there had been a breach. Ethics, I said simply. And the word was enough. The university email followed an hour later. A concise notice withdrawing sponsorship for Derek's research program due to non-compliance with disclosure standards. I didn't embellish. I didn't explain. Clarity didn't need adjectives. By noon, I moved on to personal accounts. I called the bank. Requested that every shared line of credit be frozen and every dependent card disabled, the manager asked. For how long? I answered. Permanently. Then I reached the insurance provider and removed my name as guarantor from Barbara's medical plan and Melissa's cell phone bundle. They can reapply under their own coverage, I said, listening to my own voice. Steady as concrete. Power didn't sound like shouting. It sounded like completion. Tara returned to my office with a folder of confirmations. Everything's been executed, she said quietly. I nodded and told her to take the rest of the day off. When she didn't move, I looked at her and added, don't feel sorry for them. They've been living on overdraft empathy for years. She managed a small nod before leaving. The door closed behind her with the finality of a lock clicking into place. In the afternoon, I drove to the storage facility that held the studio's materials. The clerk greeted me by name. My signature was still the one on the lease. I requested immediate termination and inventory retrieval. Are you sure? He asked. He's been paying on time. I handed him the paperwork. No, I've been paying on time. The distinction mattered. Within an hour, the delivery truck was loaded with drawings, tools, and models, all redirected to my company's supply unit. Every trace of Derek's operation had been absorbed back into its true source. When I returned home, I placed my wedding ring in the small wooden box where I kept spare keys and obsolete ID cards. It fit perfectly among things once useful. The apartment felt lighter, as if the air itself had recalibrated. For the first time in years, there was nothing left to fix. I poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and watched the streets fill with evening commuters, people moving toward homes that might still hold their illusions intact. I didn't envy them. Some of us build stability so others can feel safe destroying it. Now, I was done maintaining the illusion. I had closed every door, not to trap anyone inside, but to make sure I could finally leave without looking back. By the end of the week, the first cracks appeared. Derek's studio account was locked. His project files archived under my company's property tag. The university called him in for a meeting about the terminated grant and the irregular withdrawals tied to his name. What he had dismissed as administrative detail had turned into evidence. When dependency fails, it doesn't crumble slowly. It implodes in the exact shape of the person who held it together. He tried calling me 3 times that morning. I let the phone ring until the sound became part of the background noise. By noon, Tara forwarded a message from HR. Derek's contract termination notice had been processed. The official reason was concise. Breach of financial integrity. He must have read it the same way I once read his text to Lena once is enough to understand permanence. I imagined him sitting in that office, trying to rationalize loss as misunderstanding, rewriting guilt into victimhood. Every manipulator needs an audience. Mine had retired. Barbara was the next to react. She called from the pharmacy, furious that her card had declined. "You're punishing all of us," she said. I answered calmly. "I'm correcting an imbalance." Her voice shook. "We depended on you." I looked out the window at the cold Chicago skyline and said that was the problem. She hung up without goodbye. Dependency dressed as love only knows how to curse when it's cut off. Melissa's message came that night. Short and desperate. They're shutting off the internet. Mom's crying. You have to fix this. I stared at the screen until it dimmed and set the phone aside. There was nothing left to fix. The version of me that rushed to repair everyone's chaos had been decommissioned. Freedom didn't feel like celebration. It felt like maintenance done correctly for the first time. Derek showed up 2 days later, uninvited. He stood in the lobby of my building, arguing with security until I appeared at the glass entrance. His voice cracked through the intercom. You destroyed my life? I pressed the button and said, No, Derek. I just stopped financing it. He tried again. His tone shifting to plea. You'll regret this. I shook my head. Regret is for people who still negotiate. He stood there long enough for embarrassment to replace anger, then walked away. Shoulders slumped under the weight of accountability he'd never carried before. Later, I checked the feed from the studio storage. The shelves were empty. The locks replaced. His nameplate had been removed. The building looked sterile, uninhabited, exactly how clarity should look. I thought of how often I'd been called controlling while subsidizing everyone's comfort. Control, it turned out, was the first accusation people made when they feared losing access. That evening, I filed the final documents for the divorce. My lawyer didn't ask for reasons. The paperwork already told the story in numbers and signatures. I didn't want restitution or alimony. I wanted clean subtraction. When the notary stamped the last page, I felt something shift like air entering a sealed room. I drove home through downtown traffic, watching the lights blur across the windshield. The city was still ruthless, still indifferent. But for the first time, I didn't need it to soften. Some collapses are not tragedies. They're blueprints finally corrected. 6 months passed. Though time no longer measured distance, it only marked the quiet between consequences. Derek's world had folded inward. His name removed from university listings, his studio license suspended for financial irregularities. He tried freelancing, but no one wanted a man whose reputation came with footnotes. Silence has a price. His was credibility. Barbara moved in with a cousin outside the city, calling occasionally to deliver updates disguised as guilt. She said she was holding on, though what she meant was that the lifeline had been cut. Melissa cycled through short-term jobs that ended as soon as reliability became a requirement. The last time I heard from her, she texted, "We're trying to manage." I didn't reply. Survival wasn't cruelty. It was the overdue bill for years of comfort. Lena left quietly. The way people do when reality stops matching fantasy. A friend at the university mentioned she'd withdrawn from her program mid-semester. Love built on rescue always collapses when the rescuer runs out of resources. Derek had spent so long mistaking access for affection that when it vanished, so did devotion. The last trace of him appeared in a local forum, a sublet listing for his old apartment. Even his home had become a transaction. My own life settled into something I hadn't felt in years. Precision without exhaustion. Work no longer demanded the same desperation. Efficiency replaced urgency. My promotion came not from pity but from performance. When a colleague asked how I stayed calm through everything, I said I just stopped managing other people's chaos. The answer sounded simple but felt revolutionary. I still woke early, still made coffee the same way. But there was space now between thought and obligation. Space is underrated until you breathe in it. Some nights I walked along the river after work. The water carrying city light like moving glass. I thought about how people once called me controlling as if boundaries were something to apologize for. Clarity had become my language in silence. My grammar? I didn't forgive or forget. I just stopped participating. The world kept turning indifferent and efficient. Exactly how I liked it. When dependency failed, I learned that peace doesn't arrive as reward. It arrives as absence. The absence of noise, the absence of burden, and finally, the absence of need. For years, I believed that love meant endurance, that if I carried enough weight, the balance would return. It never did. It only taught others that my limits were negotiable. What saved me wasn't anger. It was precision. I didn't scream, plead, or compete with the noise of betrayal. I just removed the sound. Boundaries became my language and clarity. My proof of life. People call it cold when you stop rescuing them. I call it returning to room temperature. If you're listening and still holding up a world that doesn't hold you back, ask yourself what peace is costing you. Love shouldn't demand disappearance. Marriage shouldn't feel like unpaid labor. Family shouldn't sound like debt. This was my revenge, not loud, not cruel, just inevitable.